Welcome to Talking Home Renovations with the House Maven. I am your host, Catherine McPhail. I am an architect and I practice in Eastern Massachusetts. All of my work pretty much is additions and renovations to existing homes. And I started this podcast as a way to help homeowners learn everything they could about home renovations before they got started on their own, thereby hopefully relieving some of the stress of not knowing what was going to happen. So I speak to all different types of people, a lot of other architects, contractors, vendors, experts, and homeowners about their own renovations. So take a listen to the back catalog if you haven't already. And if you have already listened to those, you know that I am a big fan of old houses. I love old houses, and as I've said before, that's why I became an architect. I'm also a big fan of walls, and I have found somebody who is also a big fan of walls and, of course, old houses. Dave Rademacher is my guest today, and he's a licensed builder. He has a degree in residential design. He is currently restoring a farmhouse from the 1800s in rural Michigan with his wife. He lives there with his wife and two children, and he has made his old homes his life's passion by working on them and consulting for homeowners and contractors who are looking to honor their old home's historic fabric. All of his renovation work is documented on Instagram at Rademacher Revival. So it's pretty incredible how much work goes into all the documentation that he does. So you should go check that out for sure. So Dave and I talk about renovating kitchens and bathrooms in old homes and how you know when a house needs too much work and maybe you should pass on buying it, and what problems are easier to fix than you may think, and how to honor your old house. So here's my conversation with Dave. Kitchens and bathrooms in old houses. This is a subject that I would love to talk about.
Sure.
Because there's so many wrong ways to do it, and I guess a few right ways to do it. I love old houses. That's like that's just my love. My reason for being is these old houses, and can't
Correct.
explain that.
Yeah, agreed. So the Rademacher Revival Instagram account and the consulting and things like that is something I do on the side. I have a day job in building material sales, so it's kind of more of a passion project than anything else. But diving into old houses was my career up until what I'm doing right now. I did remodeling and restoration on old houses. This house we're currently working on, which is a late 1800s farmhouse, is my fourth old house. I don't think all the houses I've owned since I've owned houses have been over 100 years old. So it's just something I gravitate towards with the history of the houses, and entering into documenting things on Instagram and gaining a following there and kind of showing people how you do things, because I show everything that I'm doing with my own two hands. There's a lot of old house owners who are following along and saying, okay, well, I can glean something from my stories or my posts to try to help people out. And that's kind of then where my passion has gravitated towards, because I do have such a passion for old houses, and I want to enable people to work on their old houses. I don't want there to be a barrier. It's a scary thing to own an old house. People feel like there's a lot of maintenance, which there is, and it can be scary if you don't grow up in it but you desire to do it. And that's kind of where I developed a side gig consulting thing, because there's only so much I can show. You're basically limited to what I'm showing at the time. It doesn't necessarily speak to your specific situation. And sure, people can YouTube videos and there's plenty of information out there, but it's hard to pick through what's good information and what's not. And it's hard to find something that's going to apply to your specific situation in an old house. So a lot of the things I get contacted for revolve around kitchens and bathrooms in old houses, because those are the most frequently changed thing in an old house. You're rarely going to go into a house that's 100, 150 years old and find, an original bathroom, original kitchen, because those things change with the time so much. And speaking to bathrooms in particular, you're not going to go into a 150-year-old house and find an original bathroom, because the original bathroom would have been outside.
Right, exactly. You might still have the original one outside.
Right, exactly.
Probably not, yep. But so I guess that's the challenge. How do you integrate more modern facilities with the essence of an older house?
Yeah, and that's that's what people struggle with the most. And I think it's more so people don't really know what options are available to them, or really have had anybody present an alternative to what's popular right now. And all that stuff kind of comes and goes with fashion. And the barn doors are popular right now. The Moroccan mosaic tiles are popular right now. There's a lot of things that are going to come and go, but I like to approach it from an aspect of what's going to age well with the house, and what honors the history of the house.
Right.
For example, we're in a late 1800s farmhouse. It had an outhouse when it was built. Okay, so then I'm thinking through, when a bathroom was introduced into this house, what would have it looked like? And there's some liberties that you can take there, but I also want it to age well with the house. I want it to look like it's kind of been there for a long time. And since my favorite aesthetic is Art Deco, that's kind of what we gravitate towards. It's kind of an Art Deco look. And when we're done, it'll more or less look like it was put in the 20s, which is, appropriate for the house, and it looks cool. So I'm not of the mindset that, you have to go completely historically correct and put it in an outhouse, because that's just not realistic.
Well, you can't even, can you? I don't know if you'd be allowed just to put in an outhouse.
That is a good question. No, I think you're right. As far as if you have, it has to have running water to be habitable, and that sort of thing. And then the other thing that I'm pretty heavy on in my own projects is the materials that you're putting into them, because you're looking for, most people are going to remodel with new products. And I'm pretty heavy on using salvage products, whether that's a toilet, a bathtub, a sink. I always do vintage light fixtures. And I don't think people understand the resources that are available out there to put those products back in. And I think the biggest barrier to that is there's not a lot of contractors out there that want to deal with that.
By that, do you mean like retrofitting vintage fixtures to bring them up to code?
Yep, it's harder to source the parts. It's more work to get them to fit. So it's more of a pain, from a builder's aspect, who wants to just, get everything new. It's going to fit when he puts in. There's not a lot of extra work that has to go into making these fixtures work. So then I've even consulted for some builders and designers and remodelers, as to be that liaison between the homeowner and the builder, saying, okay, I'm going to help you source these fixtures. I'm going to help you design a layout that makes sense for the period of the house. And we're going to incorporate these vintage fixtures into the house. And that's what's going to help it make it look like it's always been there. And the interesting thing is that you can get these vintage fixtures for a fraction of what something new is going to cost. Sure, is it a little more work to retrofit it, but you're going to still going to be on the winning end of the finance side of it. Because, for example, I just bought sconces for our bathroom that we're currently mid renovation on, and I paid, these are 1920s Art Deco sconces, and I had to source them from a few different places to find enough, but it ended up working out to maybe $25-$30 a fixture. And to find a sconce that you're going to put in your bathroom and do something quality, it's easily going to be $300.
Yeah.
So I don't think people really think about those options. It's nice, new, shiny. But I think paying attention to those details are what's going to make it look like it fits the home.
So who does the retrofitting on those?
You mean making the fixtures work? Yeah, it depends. And that's another conversation that comes up when I'm doing consulting work, because I'm working with, a different set of homeowners every time that have different skill sets. And there's certain things that, depending on your skill set, you may want to DIY, you may want to hire a professional for. So it just depends. And there's some things that people think they should DIY, which they definitely should not under any circumstances. So yeah, with an electrical fixture, yeah, you're probably going to want to rely on an electrical shop that's going to rewire that for you. Plumbing is different, because you're just sourcing the parts that are going to work with it, which there's a number of resources out there that make different plumbing fixtures that are going to work in an antique fixture. So that's more sort of sourcing than actually retrofitting. But there's weird measurements, you gotta work. You typically have to have the pieces, and your contractor yourself, you're gonna figure out putting them in the space more so than coming up with a design and ordering things, and it's all just going to come together, when everything comes in.
So I saw your Instagram about cutting around the toilet bowl because it was in the way of the door.
Yes, right.
That was very funny. But I actually do have projects where occasionally there's a little notch in the door so it can get by the. Not the ones I've designed, but I mean when I go in to help them with people do actually cut the notches out of doors.
Well, it was interesting because that was obviously entirely a joke, but I had a number of people reach out with their own stories and or photos of a similar situation in an
Yeah.
apartment that they're living in, or a house that they've owned, where creative solutions have been had, such as that. Where I don't think I had anybody suggest. I mean, so we're talking about, because this is obviously just over audio. Um, the door is currently an in-swing door and would impede with the toilet if we'd kept it in its original swing. So we're just reversing it to an out-swing door. That way you don't have to compete with any of the fixtures inside. But it's a simple solution that apparently doesn't come to mind for a lot of people. Let's just notch out the door instead. That makes sense.
Well, it does kind of have a beauty of its own. So where do you get these antique fixtures? Would you just Google like antique fixtures, or do you get them at the architectural salvage places nearby?
Yeah, great question. It's a couple different sources for me personally. Most states I found have some sort of architectural salvage supply warehouse, in one of their major cities. For us, Lansing is the closest town but it does not have one. Grand Rapids has a few. Detroit has a few. There's one in Grass Lake. There's a nice one in Kalamazoo. So that's where you're going to find a decent collection of things. But for me, most of my stuff is found because I know what projects are coming up. I collect in advance and I end up just with a inventory of a bunch of old stuff. But it's a lot of Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist. You'd be surprised at the stuff I find on the side of the road driving through old towns when people are doing renovations, because people don't really see the value in them. They don't think people want them. They're going to end up in landfills.
Mm.
An old toilet is the hardest thing to source, it seems like, for a bathroom if you want to incorporate an old toilet, because people don't understand that there's people out there who want those. They pretty much always go in the dumpster. But I'm like, no, I want the toilet to look like it's also incorporated into this bathroom, as well as the tub, as well as the sink. I don't want a brand new toilet in a bathroom that I'm trying to make look a certain age.
So how do you deal with the current, the 1.6 gallon flush with the old toilet? That was like
I ignore it.
50-gallon flush. You ignore that. So there's no way you can retrofit that, right?
There is, yeah. There's some inserts that you can put inside of older tanks.
Oh, okay, just to fill up the room.
Retrofit them.
Yeah.
I think for us being in the Midwest and being on a well, it's not as much of an issue for states that are a little heavier as far as the water regulation is concerned.
Yeah, it varies from state to state, I guess. But okay, so then where do you end up finding these toilets? Again, Facebook Marketplace or?
Yeah, I had the one that I'm incorporating. It's a wall mount tank, and I found that one, I think, on Facebook Marketplace. I had to drive about an hour to pick it up, but it was intact, no cracks, had the original toilet seat still on it, and it had all the plumbing parts, which are, if they don't have them, they can get kind of expensive to find replacements for. But then salvage yards will have them too, especially in the bigger cities. They're just not seem as prevalent as tubs or sinks. It's just one of those things that people think, ew, gross, and goes in the landfill.
Yeah, well, yeah, people do think, oh, gross, a used toilet, but maybe they should go ahead and donate it. There are lots of places where they could donate these old fixtures if they decide they don't want them, if they're redoing
Correct.
their old houses.
So I think a lot of it's an education piece too, because my day job, I interact with just hundreds of contractors around the state of Michigan, and I'm constantly putting bugs in people's ears, like, hey, you do a remodel, and something that's pre 1940, and you're getting rid of the fixtures, hit me up. I'll take them off your hands. I'll find a home for them. So it's an education piece, I think, for contractors, that there is value in some of these things.
How do you deal with kitchens? Like bathrooms, I can totally get just going with the certain aesthetic and then finding, I guess, tiles, shower curtains. What did they do about shower curtains back in the 20s?
So a lot of the tub showers were, the freestanding clawfoot tub type, and they'd have the circular or oval, ring with the shower curtain that sticks to you when you take a shower.
Yeah, they're great. They're great. A lot of these things, I think there's a reason why this other thing was invented to take the place of the old thing. Sometimes I do think that.
Sure. Yep. It makes sense. So as far as kitchens, that's another thing where the kitchen of the 1920s or the late 1800s looks way different than the kitchen of, the 2000s. So what does that look like? And again, what we're going to do in our farmhouse is we're going to probably go back to, a 1910s-ish farmhouse, built-in cabinet. I have the benefit of being finished carpentry was my main trade back when I was doing a lot of hands-on stuff. So I can build all my own cabinets, and they'll look, they'll go, to the ceiling, and they'll look like they've always been there in kind of a farmhouse 1920s-ish, 1910s, built-in cabinet style. Our goal is to find a cast iron farmhouse sink with legs on it that will kind of build the kitchen around, so that'll look like it's always been there and kind of be the focal point of it. But then you get to things obviously like stoves and refrigerators and dishwashers and the modern conveniences that we don't want to really live without. And so there's a few different ways that you can go with that. There's, companies that make retro looking refrigerators or refrigerators that look like ice boxes, but they're modern. You can hide dishwashers behind panels. Stoves, they make vintage looking stoves, or you can go more antique and pick up an antique stove. Is it more work? Yeah. I mean, I'm more of a form over function type of guy where I'll live in something or work with something that's a little more annoying just for the aesthetic. So, and I don't harp on people if they want to put stainless steel appliances in their old house. I mean, the things that I try to educate and harp on is, the bones of the house, the structure. Let's not make a house open concept that wasn't intended to be. Let's not take out the original lighting fixtures. Let's not paint the woodwork. Let's not cover up the floors. The bones of the house, the details that once they're gone, they're gone. That's the thing that I'll stand on my soapbox about. But, things that are easy to change, cosmetic things, the appliances that you put in, even lighting fixtures, there's a lot of people who, the mid-century modern trend is pretty popular right now. And, I follow a couple accounts who just lean into the MCM in a turn of the century house, and it looks cool. But the fabric of the house is still there. You can change out a light fixture, like, in a matter of an hour. It's not a big deal. So people can put their own flair on these old houses without destroying their historic fabric.
Yeah, yeah. So what do you say to the people who want to open up their kitchen to the dining room in an old house? Because they all want to.
No, yeah, I'll say no.
So no,
Yeah,
no. Well, that's the short version. No, don't do that.
And again, it's my tendency towards the form over function, where I like the feeling of a cramped kitchen. Like that's where, in any old house that I've owned and we entertain, that's where everybody ends up, and you're kind of forced into this intimacy, and it's fun. And I enjoy the separate rooms and having a different vibe in each room. I don't know. It's just a different lifestyle. You're living in the house and conforming to the house's aesthetic rather than vice versa.
Right. What do you think of? I'm not exactly sure what this means, but people talk to me a lot about our modern lifestyle and adapting these houses to our modern lifestyle. So I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know 100% what that means, and sometimes I say, "What does that actually mean?" Because I'm not sure it means. I don't know what it means actually. What about our modern lifestyle is it that makes us want to be able to see the entire downstairs of a house in one shot?
You got me. I don't know.
I don't know either.
I like the vibe of the old house. I mean, I understand the open concept and the flow, but every house we've lived in, we kind of function our life a little bit differently around it, and it's kind of unique in its own way. Again, it's the history of the house and being a part of it rather than the other way around. So yeah, if you want an open concept house, I'd say buy an open concept house. Don't try to, because again, like, once it's gone, it's gone. You're destroying those details, and it's hard to bring those back after they're gone.
Yeah, well, that's for sure. A lot of times people want to paint the trim, they really feel like it's dark, and that just makes me
Hmm.
sad because that's once you paint it, it's over. It's never going back.
Yeah, can it be done? Yes. Do people do it? Not very often, just because it's a pretty daunting task. In our current house, all of the trim has been painted, except with the exception of the what we'll call the parlor, and it had been painted, but the previous owners had stripped it, and it's beautiful, beautiful woodwork. But I probably won't strip the rest of the woodwork just because it's such a daunting task, and I've got bigger fish to fry in the house.
It is a lot of work, especially if there's any detail in the any of the woodwork, which there often was back in the old days. So
Correct. Yep. And in an old farmhouse like ours, typically the upstairs would have been painted woodwork. It was very utilitarian. It was just used for sleeping. So they didn't put a lot of money into the upper floors of the house. So there, upstairs it makes sense. It's typically a lesser grade woodwork, and not a fancy profile, and is very utilitarian. Our farmhouse was. We haven't been able to find out exactly the details on who built it and what their status was, but it's fancy. The first floor is very fancy for being a farmhouse. It has very wide, very intricate trim work on the first floor, which is one of the things that attracted us to the house.
mm. So you have a service that you offer, which is I could take you on my phone while I'm looking at an old house to buy, and you can kind of check it
Sure.
out with me virtually, or not virtually,
Hmm.
like on the phone,
Right.
and let me know if it's going to suit my needs. Basically, you wanted to. I mean, I'm kind of intrigued by that idea because how great is that? That now that we have these video phones of the future, like you don't even
Sure.
need to live near me to help me.
Correct. Yeah. A lot of those discussions have been revolved around people who don't come from the industry, and they don't know. Sure, can somebody get an inspector to come and look at the house? Yes, and that is advisable. But depending on your budget and what you want to DIY, it's important to find the right old house that's going to work for you. There's your major things like the big ticket items like a foundation, and is the bones of the house good, because that's, if you get into something that is crumbling, a wall sagging, it's an all brick house and the foundation's shifting, that's a big ticket item that's going to blow your whole budget, and you're not going to be able to afford the things that you want to do to the house. So, that's the main thing that we're going to look at, before diving into an old house. But then it's a lot of the discussion revolves around, what do you want to hire out versus what are you capable of doing yourself? And the biggest thing that I advocate for is not worrying about doing everything to the house all at once. People perceive a barrier to entry in these old houses because they may be less expensive on the front end, but they're just thinking through what it's going to cost me to make this house how it needs to be is just overwhelming. And like, I don't have the funds for that. Well, most people don't, but also a lot of these old houses are habitable. You have to be okay living with, in our case, a kitchen that's from the 70s, and sure, it's ugly and kind of worn, but it's operable. We can live in that and tackle that when we get to it. So in our case, we renovated the bedroom quarters before moving into the house because we wanted, a nice and clean space that's already done, so we don't have to live in a bedroom that's being renovated. And we're tackling the first floor, as we live there, room by room. And so it's not something that you have to think about doing all at once and sinking a ton of money into it. If your mechanicals and the structure of the house are fine, you're watertight. That's the main thing. And the other benefit to doing it over time is it's different looking at a space on a sheet of paper, a picture, and thinking this is what I want to do to it. It's different if you're living in the space for a year and thinking through the feeling of it. What do you want to do? I mean, when I shower in the morning, that's when inspiration strikes. I'm like,
Right.
hey, I could do this. This would be really cool. And maybe, I sourced a fixture a year ago, or there's things that it opens up so many possibilities living in the area before you renovate it. And as I can look at something and design it in my head. I don't have to draw it out. I'm very, very visual that way. Most people are not. And that's the benefit. You have the ability to change your mind and make decisions over time and slowly acquire things and slowly acquire the funds to do those things. So I, for one, advocate for, you don't need to buy something that's already done or buy something and then do it all at once. Let's take our time.
Right. So you'd help people with a master plan, maybe, around how to get their house up to speed, what they want.
Yeah, it varies. Most of my consultation stuff is usually just like an hour or two long, and it sets people down the right path. They want to just be reassured because they're a lot of times first-time homeowners and they want to get into an old house and they don't know what to look for. Like, is this floor being bouncy because the floor is going to fall in, or is it just because back then the beams were undersized and the span's a little bit longer than it should be, but it's not going anywhere? Or maybe, typically the case, a plumber came through and hacked the crap out of some joists, and so now our wall's sagging. Okay, so we can, it's not that big of a deal to reinforce that area and sister some joists, and so people don't know what's a big deal and what's not.
That's true. They don't.
And
know.
People also don't understand or can identify what's an original characteristic of the house and what's not, what was added and what wasn't. And because I have the experience that I do working on old houses over the course of my career, it's pretty easy to identify, okay, this is a new addition. This is original. What's the cool factor? What was always here, in looking at those things and seeing value in those things, I think is difficult for somebody without an untrained eye to see. So typically my consults are reassuring people or saying, run for the hills, setting them down the right path. And then they kind of take it from there.
Run for the hills.
But there's been instances where they say, yes, I like this, help. I have a contractor in mind, but I don't feel comfortable that he's going to have the eye for the old details on what it should look like you do. So can you help me help him or her design the space and construct this space? And, so I'll sometimes walk with clients down the path of their restoration and making sure the builder's doing justice to the space, to somebody who hasn't worked with a contractor before, holding them accountable to doing good work, because people don't know.
Yeah, that's true. And people do think things are a bigger deal than they really are. And sometimes they are. And sometimes, like the foundation and the sagging masonry walls and that sort of thing. But sometimes just working with wood structure is really not that hard, to fix
Correct.
things.
Yep. Typically, I found the issues that people bring up are consistent with the age of the house and not really anything that is a big deal. I mean, you have plaster walls, they're probably going to be cracked. There's a fix for that. You have original windows that are a little leaky. There's a fix for that. Let's figure out, it's an education piece.
Yeah, let's fix the windows and not throw them away and replace them with vinyl windows, please.
Correct. That's the number one thing. It's rare to see a house with original windows, which is sad. And I don't think people set out to ruin the fabric of the house. It's just, again, it's an education piece. People don't understand the value in the windows and that they can be made more energy efficient than they are, and the cost factor to new windows versus what you're going to spend over time in energy consumption. Yeah. So there's a lot of variables there, and just a conversation.
Right. So what's the weirdest thing you've ever found in the walls of a project you've been working on?
Oh, weirdest thing.
I'm trying to get people to leave a message on my, on this tab on my website about it, but nobody ever calls. So I'm just going to ask from now on.
Yeah, I don't think I've found anything it's always, unfortunately, dead things like squirrels and rats and birds.
Oh dear.
And raccoons. And in our case, our property was vacant for about 2 years before we purchased it. So there was a family of raccoons living upstairs, countless squirrels, and just mice galore. So it's nothing too crazy, more just gross. It's just walls filled full of mouse turds.
Carcasses. Okay. So how can people see more about your work or get in touch with you? I know you're on Instagram and TikTok.
Correct. Instagram and TikTok at Rademacher Revival. We have a website that is rademacherrevival.com. That's where, if people want to talk more about consulting, that is where you'd contact me for that information, a little bit more about us. All of our media pieces that we've done, if people really are interested about our story, are on the website as well. And then on the Instagram, if you have just billions of hours on your hands, we've documented basically daily renovations since we bought this property about a year ago. All of my highlights are every single story that I've done since we purchased the property. So I need to eventually go through and organize them a little bit better in terms of, refinishing floors, doing plaster work, that sort of thing. But right now it's all in chronological order. So if people are interested in that, they can go look through stories. And then, I don't want to open the floodgates, but I love helping the old house community. So, little things here and there, I'll help people out with, if it's an easy type question.
Yeah, that's great. Do you have any final tips or thoughts that you want to share with my huge listenership?
No, I think the biggest thing is we're advocating for old homes and seeing the value in old homes, and I want people to see that and understand that it's not something to be afraid of. It's something that has value, and I think we're getting there. With the Cheap Old Houses Instagram account launching their HGTV program, it's heading in the direction of these older homes have value, preservation has value.
Yeah, I think that's great.
It's an education piece, and as that grows, I think people will get into it more. We're trying to make old stuff cool.
Well,
so
old stuff always has been cool, but you're just, I guess, trying to get people to realize that old stuff is cool.
Correct. Yeah. If we can make what I do to old houses a fad, let's go.
Yeah, let's go. That would be fun.
So we'll make it cool to have separated rooms instead of old open concept. We'll make it cool to have vintage fixtures, and it's trending that direction. So I think the more education we can put out there about the value in these old houses and preserving the history and the details, I think the better off our community will be.
What about like a wall hung rotary phone with a long curly cord? With that, I mean, that's probably from like the 70s, but still, that's kind of retro and fun.
Yep. And to that point, if you've been following along our Instagram account, underneath what we're using as our main bedroom, underneath the carpet, we found a linoleum pattern from the 40s that was tattered and torn up and just in awful condition, but it was so cool looking. It was a very brightly colored floral pattern. And of course, that's not original to the house, but instead of tearing it out and refinishing the floors, we decided to restore it as much as possible and then preserve it because it tells the story of the house. It's part of a renovation that was done to the house, and it looks cool. So a rotary phone that was in the 70s, is it original to the house? No, but it's part of the story of the house. And so we can have an old house and have it show its age through the centuries of the people that lived there. And what we're doing to the houses is also going to tell the story of the house. And hopefully somebody will look at that and say, okay, that's cool. We're going to incorporate that into the house. So you don't have to live in a museum. You can do justice to the house, but still have different things, throughout the ages that are cool.
Yeah. I mean, there are so many things that are really, really, I don't know, they're just evocative of a different time. And I just think about someone spending hours and hours sitting on the stairs, like 15 feet away from the phone, talking on the phone, like maybe doodling on the wall or whatever.
Absolutely. Yep. That's the fun part.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you so much, Dave, for joining me and telling me your story and the story of your house. And I just love following along. So thanks.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again, Dave, for joining me on the show and sharing your insights into old houses. And thank you for listening. There'll be links to all of Dave's information in the show notes. And of course, the episode enhancements will have some images of him working on his projects. So you can also get those episode enhancements delivered straight to your inbox if you sign up for my newsletters. And there's a link for that also in the show notes. That comes out every Wednesday morning. It's also on my website, so you can go check them out there. If you have ideas for stories or you want to be a guest, you can email me at thehousemaven@talkinghomerenovations.com. You can also contact me through Facebook, where I'm talking home renovations, Instagram, where I'm talking home renovations. On TikTok, I'm the House Maven. Twitter, it's Talking Home Reno. And also, I have a Clubhouse room on Monday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern. It's called House Club, and I am co-moderating that room with Mona Ying Reeves of Kickstart House. So she's an architect from California who helps homeowners, and of course I'm from Massachusetts, so we're spanning the whole country. Anyway, come join us. You can chat with us there on the Clubhouse app. And if you need some design advice and you're in Massachusetts, you can call up the Ask an Architect Design Helpline. So there's more information about that on my architecture site, which is demiosarchitects.com. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. If you like this show, that would be great if you would leave a rating and a review, even if you have time. And those really help out somehow they help out my analytics. So if you could do that, that would be great. And also, of course, tell your friends about this if they could use the information. Talking Home Renovations with House Maven is a member of Gable Media, which is the most engaged AEC multimedia network on the planet. You can check out the other podcasts and video channels that are a part of that network at gablemedia.com. That's GABLMEDIA.com. And this podcast is a production of my architecture firm, Demios Architects, where we believe architects are for everyone. Until next time, take care.